Welcome everybody to the latest Zoom talk from LEEDS Theosophical Society. We've been doing this now for 5 years, and this afternoon we're going to welcome Dr. Antti Savinainen from Finland, who is going to talk about life review at the gate of death, and we'll be looking at near-death experiences and what Theosophy has to say about many of these things. So welcome, Antti, and the floor is yours.
Thank you, Tim, so much. So this is a topic which I've been interested for over 2 decades or so. And I think it's very important from several perspectives. First of all, from a scientific perspective, and then secondly, personal perspective. So let's see. And this is a synopsis of my talk. And let's start with what is a life review? Life review is something that takes place spontaneously when a person is near death, say like drowning or having a heart attack or some serious illness. It could happen. But on the other hand, it could happen for people who are mountain climbers and they fall for a couple of seconds. Even though they are not dying while in the fall, they still may have the induced life review. And life review is, of course, as the word suggests, it's something that is like a film flashing through my eyes. I think this is in a popular culture nowadays. You can hear it in movies and in many connections, people saying in some scary situation, they might say it even if though they don't really have life review, but that's something that they know that it may exist. And the first documented case, at least in Western side of the globe, is from 1847, and I will go through that first. It's a British case, and that took place actually in 1791 or so. It's a drowning case, but then it was later documented in a letter and then published in a book. And scientific research is rather new. It started about quite close to 50 years ago. There were some research papers before that in 1960s and some papers even in the 19th century, but they are not specifically about life review, but they were about these occurrences which happened, which we now call near-death experiences. But they were in obscure magazines in Friends, for instance, and not many other sources one can find. So let's say that the modern scientific research started in 1970s, and Raymond Moody's book, Life After Life, it was a game changer. It became a bestseller, and it became known in many countries because it was quickly translated in Finnish in 1978, for instance. I remember having first read the book in 1980s, and I was quite fascinated with it. And then Theosophy and anthroposophy have something to say about life review as well. And to understand that properly, I will introduce constitution of human being. Of course, Theosophists know this already, but perhaps somebody is listening to this who doesn't know that so well, and it may help to explain what's going on. Because from the point of view of science, of course, one can look at what happens in the brain before and after, and perhaps even speculate what happens during that. They really don't have a good explanation of the life review, say, because it has features which are so different from everyday memory. But Theosophy has an explanation, which I will try to provide in this talk. And the first theosophical source was the Mahatma Letter from 1882, and it explains quite typical life review taking place at the moment of death. And then Plavatski wrote her account 10 years later, or less than 10 years later, and then Besant just at the end of the century, and then later on 1915 or even earlier, Rudolf Steiner and Pekka Ervas from Finland, a pioneer of Finnish Theosophical movement in 1920s. And I will compare these with what we know from science and have some final remarks. So let's start. This is the first one that is published in English language, as far as I can tell. So take a look. It's in this. Every past incident of my life seemed to glance across my recollection in retrograde succession, Not, however, in mere outline, as he stated, but the picture filled up with every minute and collateral feature. In short, the whole period of my existence seemed to be placed before me in a kind of panoramic review, and each act of it seemed to be accompanied by a consciousness of right or wrong, or by some reflection on its cause or its consequences. Indeed, many trifling events which have been long forgotten then crowded into my imagination, and with the character of recent familiarity. So, this is just an excerpt, and just earlier on the letter says that something which means that the operation of mind is highly enlightened. It's much faster, much more clear, lucid. And the memories are detailed, and every memory seems to be there, even those which have long been forgotten. And they take place from the end to the beginning in retrograde order. And there's moral evaluation and understanding of the course and or the consequences of the action, which is quite important. And the duration is at most 2 minutes. Actually, the Francis Burford tells that in his letter. And of course, if it takes more than 2 minutes, then the drowning would have been permanent and we wouldn't have this document. So this is the first one. In 1847, it was published. This is about best scientific evidence we have so far from the book Crossover Experience. And there are, the main author is this person here, and then Pimman Lommel, whose work is perhaps the best in the field in this regard, and then Gregory Sushman, who does research on Asian cultures and their near-death experiences. So there are 4 such papers which are so prospective. So what does prospective mean? It means it's the golden standard in medical science. And for instance, Pimman Lommel did it in a way that every person coming into the hospital having a heart attack, that was the criteria. Heart attack must take place, which means during the heart attack, after 20 seconds or so, the brain stops functioning, at least in the ordinary way. There is no measurable electric activity that one can see in the brain. So that was the criteria. And they took everybody for 10 years and gathered data. And then 344 people met the criteria, and 62 of them had the near-death experience. So this is the percents, 18% of total. And then Parnia and Fenwick, who just passed away quite recently, and Parnia is still active in the field, they had another paper, but there's only 4 near-death experiences who do remember. Everybody else, 59, did not remember anything. And of course, Bruce Grayson's work here. Grayson is one of the greatest researchers in this field, and he did one prospective study. And what is particularly interesting from the perspective of my presentation today is how many experienced a life review. And that's weighted average, weighted with respect to the participants here, is 15%, which is 13% here. And here the Parnia's paper had only 4, so none of them probably had that, and then 9% and 30%. So this is quite typical. This comes in retrospective studies as well. It's interesting. This crossover experience book then takes retrospective studies which are maybe years after the incident, not immediately when person wakes up. That it, in order to be prospective, people has to be interviewed pretty soon after it's possible. But in retrospective, it may happen years and years later. But still, the numbers are not that different, which I think is good support for the phenomenon itself. So there are not many studies of life reviews which would have lots of people participating, but this is coming from 30 years ago. Ian Stevenson, who did most of his work with children's reincarnation memories, and he was interested in this phenomenon as well. And this is quite interesting from the point of view of this talk. So panoramic, all at once, he had 2 series of data. One series was gathered from the various sources which they did not investigate themselves. Another series was about subjects which they interviewed personally, some of these researchers. So 15% in the other series one, the series one, and then 27% had panoramic. And then the order at which this, if it's panoramic, it may be that the person watches or sees them in a particular order. Is it from birth to childhood, or from present back to childhood? This seems to be the most prevalent, this birth to childhood order, but it varies. And then there are some who have no particular sequence. But it may be understood in a way that, let's assume first that if it's indeed somewhat panoramic, even if the person doesn't feel it that way or see it that way, it then may be that any particular order might be possible depending on factors we don't know. But that's just a hypothesis. And I think that order itself is not that important, so it seems to vary. And then there's another table in that study which I'd like to show, which is how many memories were remembered. And whole life or everything is has quite a high percentage here, 59% and 44% in the second series, and then many and some and few. But so the whole life, even if the time is not that long, it may be a couple of seconds, couple of minutes. In some cases, it can be longer, but typically people will die if it's too long. For instance, if the heart attack goes on too long or so. So that is the estimated time when these memories must take place. And here are these experts of life review accounts, which are gathered by researchers in the field. Sorry, I did. And here we can see, if we look at the first one here, that people see what they have done to others, what they have said, and even what they have thought. And they experience the feelings again, and then felt what others felt about their lives, which is quite interesting, that it's not just a personal encounter with one's memories, but something that when others are involved, the person seeing the life review sees and feels what others felt. And even further than that, how the acts or acting or not acting rippled in effect towards other people and their lives. So it seems as if it's some kind of cosmic viewpoint, what my life and what my actions had started, which is quite amazing. And this is not just one person saying, but quite many persons are saying that. And how each little decision or choice affects the world. And another interesting point is here that we may think, when we reflect our own lives in ordinary day consciousness, as I might say, we might think that this was wrong, definitely, and this was good act. But it may be when people tell these stories that something they felt was wrong, it wasn't that wrong. It was quite insignificant, and some achievements they thought this is very nice and something to celebrate it with. It's not that important. But the little deeds, little things, somebody passes by and one may watch, have a compassionate look, or say some nice words, or just do a little act of kindness, they may be much more prominent than, say, some grand, great deeds that we might think are extremely important. So this is something. And then the effect is not just about people, it's about plants, animals, soil, all our surroundings, and even unknown passengers by on the street, how they were influenced by what we did. This is quite humbling if one thinks about it. And then there's this moral evaluation, which we saw in the first published case. And this is typically carried out the person themselves or persons themselves. And it is something which is different from everyday evaluation. It seems to be somewhat objective. And later on, I will reveal the theosophical reason why the person can be objective and seen like almost like through God's eyes, or from different eyes. Sometimes there's spiritual being, a loving guide who can help and make comments. But in vast majority of cases, this loving guide, the spiritual being, is just asking gently, and even cases which the person deems immoral, this was wrong action, there is no judgment. There are some cases, some studies say 1 to 2% of near-death experiences are negative, even hellish, and in those cases, it may be that the evaluation is judgmental. They seem to be rare cases. But then one thing that about moral evaluation, which people see that they only knowledge and love is something that we can take to the other side. I suppose knowledge is not necessarily everyday knowledge, but knowledge about which is, they don't say it, but I might suspect it's something about spiritual knowledge. Anyway, then there are life-changing effects. Anybody who goes through the near-death experience, and especially life review, the life changes take place without life review as well. But life review is very important because it has that moral element embedded. And this is one long study which was published in Lancet, the Lancet is the second best, depending on the criteria, the second best general medical journal on the planet. So it's highly respected. It's British, by the way. And here one can see what kind of after effects there are between the people who remember and who don't remember, no NDE. And if you take a look at understanding others, after 2 years, because one long study was prospective, and then it also was longitudinal in the sense that they interviewed people after 2 years, and then after 8 years when they entered the hospital with this heart attack. Of course, they couldn't interview everybody, so these numbers are only about those who were alive and were able and willing to have an interview. And understand purpose of life, it had increased within 2 years a lot. So 52% of the people felt that they strongly agree or somewhat agree with this statement. It did happen also with those with no ND, but interest in spirituality was quite different. That, as you can see here, after 8 years, there's a strong component of spirituality, which is not about ordinary religion, but spirituality, as perhaps Theosophists understand it. But in the group which had no memories whatsoever, it declined a lot. They were a bit more drawn to church and traditional religions, but near-death experiences were not. And then the after effects. Raymond Moody, which I mentioned earlier, has coined a nice phrase. It's 1 minute psychotherapy. And it really is for those who have had the experience. And this is one of the most beautiful examples I found. It's from Van Lommel's book. My aggression is a thing of the past. I feel a strong inner urge to never lie again. I do struggle with deadlines. Things must be get done within a certain time. I enjoy life immensely. I believe that people have stopped living from the heart. So there are many things which we Theosophists aspire, at least as an ideal, what we'd like to become. And they have had a good head start in that path. And here is a little kind of sum up of what Theosophy thinks about human constitution. This is from a book, The Essential Pekka Ervast, and my friend Vesa Rappana did this presentation. So here is the triangle, which is the higher I, higher self in us, which is immortal. And this is our typical soul and body, which I think this is mostly what science looks at and can investigate. Our thinking capacity, our feeling capacity, and the physical body, and its etheric double, which has the life forces in it. This is not acknowledged by science today, but I'm pretty confident it is there. And this is kind of the totality of human being. And in between the higher self and the lower self or personality, there is this link or bridge, which in Sanskrit is ahtankarana. So this should be something which in one life, from one life to another, we would be able to increase this. So there would be flow of wisdom and love and strength to the lower I personality, and then it transform it. Eventually, when they merge with each other, then we say initiation has taken place, and we have achieved at least one extremely important milestone on our path of humanity. So this is briefly the theosophical point of view. And especially important for the explanation what happens in life review is etheric body, also higher I, individuality. These both are very important. So what about theosophy? This is from the Mahatma Letter. So it's 140 years almost since it took place, something like that. So the whole life reflected in our memory, one event after the other. Every impression entrusted to it during the period of the brain activity. And the ego lives, and this is ego with the capital letter is the higher self or inner self. So it's not the personality, but it's the ego or higher selves which is present here. And Mahatma Letter says, few brief seconds, it takes this whole life over. The scientific research has examples when it does take place only a couple of seconds, for instance, during the fall from a mountain or so. But then again, there are some cases when it takes probably some minutes. So, but this does have some support. And then Blavatsky, our theosophical mother. The key to theosophy, which, by the way, I heartily recommend to anybody who is interested in knowing what theosophy is, that it may be a good starting point. So Blavatsky provides more details, and it's the solemn moment. This is the idea, that the moment of death is not anything to be afraid of. It's a holy moment for every person. And the whole life passes through in minutest details. And again, short instant, just like in the Mahatma Letter. And here, Blavatsky tells the ego thing a little bit more precisely. The person becomes one with the individual and all-knowing ego. And that's why the person can understand the chain of causes and everything that has happened, and remains as a spectator, and feels and knows the justice of all the suffering that has taken place. This is a very good and deep explanation. Annie Besant in Ancient Wisdom explains this in terms of the etheric body and introduces the term panorama, which is, I'm not sure if it has been used before in Theosophy. It may have, but this is what I found. So as the Lord of the body draws himself away. I think this refers to the higher self, enwrapped in the violet gray etheric body and absorbed in the contemplation of the panorama of his past life and complete in every deed. So this has two important aspects, etheric body and the panorama. And then I'll finish Pekka Ervast. He had lecture series in 1928 and 1929, and this is put together from his lectures. It's coming from the book From Death to Rebirth. And he actually says a lot of what Blavatsky already said, and he places within half an hour. Sometimes in other lectures, he may say 1 or 2 hours or 3 hours or so, depending on the case. But anyway, it's in his view, it's not seconds, but it's a little bit long. But the person is outside the whole play. And the important thing is that judging takes place objectively. There are no personal feelings affecting it. And the reason why there are no personal feelings and where there's objective judgment is that he remains in a great light. It's the personalized higher self. That's why it is. It's due to the higher self. And the great light is actually something which Tibetan Buddhists also explain. It's called the clear light, which emerges at the moment of death. So they have this same kind of understanding. Of course, they have different way of conceptualizing that experience, but there are similarities. Rudolf Steiner, he talks a lot about life panorama. This is a bit later. Rudolf Steiner left the Theosophical Society in 1913, one might say, and but it's just shortly after his Theosophical period. And he says that this goes for days, this overview of the experience, universal dream experience, but it's very, very clear and quite different from ordinary day consciousness experience. It's powerful, it's vivid, and clear consciousness. Everything is revived. Every single conversation, we hear it again. Everything we had exchanged with them in terms of feelings, we experience it again. Compressed into a few days gives a complete overview. Why does Steiner say few days, a few days? It is because in theosophical understanding, the etheric body, the double with the physical body, which actually gives life to the physical body, when the death takes place, the connection between the physical body and the etheric body is severed. The link is cut, this silver thread. And that the personality lives in that etheric body for 1 day, 2 days, 3 days, a couple of days, depending on the situation. And then the etheric body is left behind, and this personality will continue its life in Kamaloka, which is more like an astral world. So that is quite important to remember. And Steiner's view insights are somewhat different. He says that there are no emotions in observing the panorama. It shows how our actions were, but there is no moral evaluation during this observing the panorama of life, according to Steiner, even though all the other theosophical sources explicitly say that there is. Steiner does have the moral evaluation, but it takes place before the soul goes into the soul world or Kamaloka. That takes place there. So at the end of this panorama. And Cheeto's life review is short, which makes sense. They don't have that many experiences. And when etheric body breaks away, there is a brief state of unconsciousness, and then one wakes up in Kamalok. But the etheric body here is the key, because etheric body has, we have physical brain, but we have also etheric brain. And physical brain doesn't remember things so clearly and so precisely and forgets things. And actually, we know quite a lot in psychology how memory works. It's basically retelling everything all over again. It fabulates, it constructs memories, and it kind of explains things which may have happened in that way, but not necessarily. So memory alone is not that trustworthy in psychological research. And for instance, in cults, it can't be trusted that if one person remembers something, if it's not supported by other evidence, it's not strong evidence. Whereas in this etheric experience, it's completely different. Things which have been forgotten are there, and they are clear and lucid, and everything, one thing after another, takes place. So it's a different type of memory system completely. And that's what Theosophy says. And then there is a forthcoming paper on near-death experience and Theosophy. I had this feeling that Theosophy hadn't received enough attention in this regard, because Theosophy has talked about life reviews and a moment of death and what happens for quite a long time, almost since the founding the Theosophical Society. And near-death experience research could benefit from it. And of course, I realized that I couldn't write this kind of paper alone, because I've done research, but it's from different field, physics education research. So I eventually got in contact with a New Zealand psychology professor, Natasha Tasselmatamua, and she was connected with Bruce Grayson, and Bruce agreed to work with us, and we wrote an article which explains these other sources which I just showed to you, but not Steiners. We thought we just concentrate on theosophy because it's easier to explain. They have a similar framework. Steiner has somewhat different framework. And this is a part of the abstract. Overviews on theosophical literature that references life reviews and propose potential origins of the accounts before discussing their implications in light of theosophical understandings. I didn't press any agenda in this sense that I said to Natasha that whatever comes out from the data, that's what we do, because that's how science works. It doesn't work in a way that I have this is my conclusion, which must be there. So we look at the data, we compare them quite carefully, and then thought about that Natasha did extremely careful work in comparing theosophical ideas and the timing of theosophical ideas with other sources. And that's how we ended up. And when it appears, I suggest that Theosophists would read it because it is quite positive towards our own understanding, and more positive than perhaps I could even hope for, because I didn't want to press any particular conclusion, only what comes after data. And the data was quite good, as you have seen. And then this is something which I more or less said already, but just a brief review of astral life in Kamaloka, which is very consistently explained in theosophical literature. And here the effects of past life are intimately felt, and sometimes it's called purgatory, hard word to pronounce. And this can be painful, even very painful, because in that state we don't have physical body which would in any way shield us from those quite strong feelings. Because the thing is that what other people have felt about us, and if we have caused pain to other people, then we will experience the very same pain, but with no physical body protecting us anymore. And if we've been cruel and ruthless to other people and living beings, we will feel everything. So I think it's something which people should know. They should really know that this will take place, and no religion, no prayer, no nothing can stop them from happening. Even though if the person knows about this and knows about the higher ideas of life, everybody can go through them. But if one knows and accepts that this is what I need to do, then it's much faster and easier to handle. So that will help. But nobody can get away from their deeds. And it's a bit similar like in near-death life review, which does have this component of feeling what others felt, even in not in objective way, but even in themselves. This is a little bit same, but I think this is much stronger experience. Anyway, there are some similarities and differences. And then there is no just one type of life review in the NDE. And duration from documented cases, it varies between seconds and minutes and even sometimes longer, even hours. And then there's some variation in theosophy as well, and especially in Steiners, which is a couple of days. But the point here, what do we learn from the near-death experience and theosophy and about the life reviews is that love and compassion towards all sentient beings, that's the key. That's the most important thing. If the person who listened to this remembers nothing else from this, this is something you can take with you home. Here are the sources for my presentation. Thank you for listening.
Okay, thank you very, very much indeed for that, Antti. I thought it was a very excellent overview of the importance of these near-death experiences in particular. And what's always intrigued me about it, and perhaps you have some insight into this, from the figures you provided, it seems to be that most people undergoing these things have this life review starting with childhood and working into old age, although a few people have it the other way. What are your thoughts on that? What do you conclude from that?
Well, I've thought about that to some extent, and for instance, when one goes through their lives in Kamaloka in astral world after life review has taken place, quite clearly, theosophical sources say that it's from the final moments back to the birth and even beyond, when before you were incarnated. But that's different. That's kind of the second way of going through one's life. But I've tried to see what is the order in which these take place in theosophical sources, and it's not that easy to say. They just say it one after another. Perhaps it implies that it's from birth to the end. But if one thinks that it's panorama, that everything around one kind of floats in the sea of those memories, then you might trigger from the beginning to the end, or the other way around, or some other order. So it may be quite personal. That's where the evidence seemed to point.
Yes, yes, indeed. And also, I wonder that given the fact that we are departing from physical bodies and we're therefore parting from the material world, where physical time, or where we view time as being linear, perhaps once we get into this state, time is no longer linear, and it is more of an eternal present rather than things flowing from the past through the present into the future. And perhaps this is why these memories, if they last for just 2 minutes, I mean, that's a lot of memories. If you're 70 or 80 years old and you've had a lot of conversations with people, a lot of interactions with people, that's a lot to go through in 2 minutes, isn't it?
Indeed, it is. So what the research says about this state of consciousness is that it's extremely lucid and real. People say they are much more alive during that phase than ever in their lives, which is quite interesting. And I think it's about the etheric brain, which is quite different from the physical brain. So we are kind of hindered. We are kind of it acts as a filter, which perhaps gives us some shield from the world, and but on the other hand, it prevents us from being our real selves, typically.
So I've got one other question I have for Antti before anybody comes in with their questions or comments. In one of the tables you showed, it it demonstrated that there is this overwhelming feeling of peace in this other place. And I'm sure that that will come as a great comfort to a lot of people. I can't remember what proportion of it, what proportion of people undergoing these experiences felt, but it seemed to be a significant number. And in the work that I've done and the research that I've done into these near-death experiences, which is not as extensive as yours, a number of people in Raymond Moody and Pim van Lommel and others I studied all reported this feeling of just peace on the other side, nothing like the turmoil one feels in the physical world and with all its problems and emotions and everything. So surely this is something which does take away the fear of death if people know that there is a strong likelihood that the place that they're going to go to is one of profound peace and tranquility, then, that's something to look forward to, I would have thought.
Well, it's two-thirds, the weighted average from the best studies that report that. It may be that people feel that, but they just, in the statement, they just didn't mention it explicitly. But anyway, it's very prevalent. And the reason why there is peace and tranquility, I think from theosophical perspective, is that the higher self is involved. It provides the light. Steiner talks about cosmic light coming, and Tibetan Buddhists talk about the clear light of this primordial existence comes into play, and that's why it's peaceful. But I need to be a bit more careful with that. That after this life review is open and one starts the life in Kamaloka, it may not be that pleasant as I mentioned, but the actual death is blissful.
Right. Well, thank you very much, Antti, for a very interesting and very panoramic talk about this intriguing subject that many people don't want to talk about. So thank you all for joining us. And in the meantime, I hope you all have a very interesting, productive, and wonderful week. So from Leeds Theosophical Society, it's goodbye for now. Thank you
Bye
for
bye.
bye
Thank
bye.
you.
Thank you, Antti.